afternoon, and welcome to today's program titled The Power of the Unicorn, a lecture by Barbara Drake Boehm. My name is Jamie DeSimone, and it's my pleasure to serve as the Farnsworth Art Museum's Chief Curator, where I also had the honor of working with the entire museum staff to organize the inaugural Momentum exhibition titled Emilie Stark-Menneg, Thread of Her Scent. Emilie, long fascinated with unicorns as well, became introduced to Barbara's scholarship after a visit to the Met Cloisters to see the unicorn tapestries. Together, we have studied and become admirers of Barbara's work, but today we welcome Barbara to the Zoom stage. Barbara is the Paul and Jill Ruddock Curator Emerita of the Met Cloisters. She was the curator of the exhibition A Blessing of the Unicorns in 2013, author of A Blessing of the Unicorns for the Metropolitan Museum of Art Bulletin in 2019, and a contributor of the Potsdam Conference of the Unicorns in 2024, among many other accomplishments. A specialist and expert on this topic, we are honored to invite her to the Farnsworth Zoom stage to discuss unicorns. Dismissed today as the stuff of legend, they continue to entrance the young and to inspire the creative, as the dreamy paintings of Emilie Stark-Menneg clearly demonstrate. But for medieval and Renaissance Europeans, they were elusive beasts worthy of serious research and analysis. This lecture will trace the scientific study of the unicorn and consider how the efforts to harness the extraordinary power resulted in the creation of fine works of art. Before turning it over to Barbara, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the generous support of the Momentum exhibition sponsors, including the Edelman Family Foundation, who initiated a challenge match, and the invaluable contributions of additional matching donors, including the Wolf Kahn Foundation, Elise and Walter and Ron Stern, Crocker House Country Inn, the Lois Childs Foundation, the Snyder Foundation, A.R. and Mary Louise Tandy Foundation, the Sherman Family Foundation, Cynthia and Jim Kinley, Blue Raven Gallery, Campbell, Carol Eisenberg, Elizabeth Moss Galleries, the Dorothy and Leah Rabkin Foundation, Marion Matson, Will and Timms, and Brett Haney. I would also like to thank museum staff who have lent their logistical expertise and talents to operate today's event, including Abigail Nash, Alexis Saba, Emily Fisher, and Gwendolyn Loomis Smith. So without any further ado, take a seat, get excited, and I'm going to turn it over to Barbara to share all of her expertise about unicorns. Barbara, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Jamie. And what an amazing list of sponsors. That's quite impressive. It just shows you the power of the unicorn, doesn't it?
It does.
I'm going to share my screen because that's what we're all about today, and I'll just be up here in the corner. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for inviting me. I love to speak about unicorns, and I've been around the world doing so. It's nice to do it for a home audience, I guess you could say. From Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass to James Thurber's short story about a unicorn in the garden, from Parisian Gothic ivories to the paintings of Emilie Stark-Menneg, unicorns are on parade. Indeed, for more than 2 millennia, men, women, and children alike have sustained an irrepressible belief in an elusive one-horned animal possessed of magical powers. But there is more to this subject than child's play and adult fantasy. Renowned European scientists, too, have long focused their attention on the study of the unicorn. But what exactly did they look for, and what did they expect to find? In the first tapestry from the Cloisters' magnificent ensemble devoted to the hunt for the unicorn, no one seems quite sure. A young man who has climbed a tree at the right beckons to his friends, apparently signaling that he's spotted something. Another close by seems to have heard his call and advances tentatively. Meanwhile, a group of 3 are still conferring, one even turning his head away from the scout, while a 4th tends to a pair of dogs. The dogs have yet to pick up the scent. One sniffs the ground, another the air. 2 turn their heads in the direction from which they appear to have come. Uncertainty hovers amidst the flowers in this deep wood. What should the hunters expect? Reports penned over the century provided salient but sometimes conflicting details about the nature of that sought-after creature, the unicorn. Today, we will consider what learned men of the past and one woman said about the unicorn, focusing on some key European authorities. From the classical world, from medieval Europe, and from the Age of Discovery, naturalists, archaeologists, university professors, historians, philosophers, medical doctors, and apothecaries all committed to a deeper understanding, to advancing the science of the unicorn. What physical and visual evidence did they bring to their study? How did they describe the beast? What did they believe were the benefits derived from the creature? And finally, what did they consider its natural habitat? Their earnest investigations brought the unicorn compellingly to life, often including or invoking works of art that informed and enhanced the knowledge and wonder of this subject. Like twisting lances of ivory, such were the treasures of nature understood to be the horns of unicorns, safeguarded in European churches and castles from London to Krakow. 2 examples of unknown provenance, preserved in London and Liverpool, attest to the esteem in which such horns were held already in the 12th century, when their surfaces were magnificently embellished with delicate carving. The Royal Abbey of Saint-Denis outside Paris, a place you all know well in the wake of the Olympics if you didn't before, possessed one of the most renowned, purportedly of earlier date, as it was legendarily said to have been given to Charlemagne in the 9th century by the Abbasid Caliph Harun al-Rashid. The royal treasure of Westminster Abbey possessed one too. Stolen in 1303, it was later found, hidden under the bed of a resident member of the religious community turned thief. In Strasbourg, a miscreant broke off the tip of the unicorn horn preserved in the city's celebrated cathedral. The treasury of San Marco in Venice possessed a unicorn horn that was listed in the inventory of 1325, and one said to have been gifted to the Ottoman Sultan. King Charles VI of France, the Duke of Berry, and the Duke of Burgundy all listed unicorn horns among their prized possessions. One in the collection of Lorenzo de' Medici was valued at his death in 1492 at 6,000 gold florins, 8% of his entire household worth. One kept by Elizabeth I at Windsor was valued by a German traveler in 1598 at 100,000 pounds. The horn preserved today in the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna is part of a treasure so important that it was decreed an inalienable heirloom of the House of Austria by the Habsburgs. All these and more, some 50 complete tusks across Europe, were tantalizing testaments to the existence of the unicorn. But what did a unicorn look like? Ctesias, a Greek physician and historian of the 4th century BCE, was the earliest authority in the classical world to discuss the unicorn. His text, while now lost, was repeatedly quoted by subsequent scholars, from the Roman author Claudius Aelianus to the Arian Christian Philostorgius to Photius of Constantinople, a Byzantine churchman and nimble politician, and beyond. Particularly notable is Ctesias' description of the animal as colorful, an appearance currently favored for children's plush toys and apparel. Ctesias described unicorns as follows. Their body is white, their head purple, their eyes a dark blue. This animal has a horn in the middle of its forehead. It is a cubit long. The base of the horn near the forehead is all white for about 2 inches. The upper part, the tip of the horn, is a vivid shade of red. The intermediate part is black. Admittedly, Ctesias may not be a household name today, but it was to Aristotle, who drew on Ctesias' text in his own History of Animals, notwithstanding the fact that he said Ctesias was not really to be trusted. For his part, the Roman author and naturalist Pliny the Elder, his text seen here in a Renaissance translation into the Florentine dialect, described an animal with the body of a horse, the head of a stag, and a horn emerging from the middle of its forehead. Sounds rather elegant, until it all becomes quite comical with the addition of the ungainly feet of an elephant and the inherently silly tail of a boar. The scientific description begins with the body and head of animals familiar to European readers. The unexpected appendages render it exotic. The text of Julius Caesar's commentary on the Gallic Wars, well known across medieval Europe. You see here an example of a manuscript of that from the 9th century and from the 15th century. It draws further on the comparison to a stag, describing, and I'm quoting in translation, an ox shaped like a stag, from the middle of whose forehead between the ears stands forth a single horn, taller and straighter than the horns we know, that inhabited the Hercynian forest, stretching over much of present-day Germany and beyond. The text of the Physiologus, its very title meaning the scientist, written in Greek but translated into Latin in the 5th century, specifies that the unicorn has the beard and cloven hooves of a goat. And here you see the beard, the goat-like beard, in a detail from the Cloisters' unicorn resting in the garden. Also in the mid-5th century of our era, the Byzantine historian Philostorgius turned his attention to fauna of the Orient. He described an animal called a unicorn, which is found in these parts. Quite exceptionally, he added that it has a head like a serpent, except for a single crooked horn of no great size, which grows upon it, and its whole chin is covered with a beard. Its neck is lengthy and reaches high aloft, and especially resembles the folds of a serpent, but the rest of its body more nearly approaches that of a stag, with the exception of its feet, which are those of a lion. Such texts, all by authors who spoke with authoritative voice, some of them with sterling reputations that endure to this day, were invoked across Europe for centuries in an ongoing effort to classify the animal known only by a mystifying, elegant trace. In this context, it is significant that a number of these scholarly authors refer to images to reinforce their texts. Works of art partner as documentary evidence in support of the written word. Philostorgius's text supplements the description of the unicorn with the crucial note that, quote, an image of this animal in relief is to be seen at Constantinople, specifically in one of the imperial palaces. Its placement there, amidst other works of art, gave the unicorn the stamp of royal authority. When I give this lecture in Britain, I say, the unicorn by appointment to His Majesty. It's sort of the idea here. The 6th century Christian merchant of Alexandria, known as Cosmos Indicopleustes, Cosmos who sailed to India, similarly bolstered his evidence concerning the appearance of unicorns by reference to art, both a sculpture and a drawing of it that he himself penned. He admitted, I cannot say that I have seen him, but I have seen 4 brazen figures of him set up in the 4-towered palace of the king of Ethiopia. From these figures, I have been able to draw him as you see. Cosmos cites sculptural images, not 1, but 4, presumably 1 at each corner of the tower. These were costly ones, fashioned from brass, located at a place of inherent authority, a royal residence. On the basis of these, he then draws the unicorn, a white, horse-like animal standing tall. Almost a millennium later, in the late 15th century, the age of the printed book, another traveler draws a unicorn based on his observations. Artist Erhard Roerich of Utrecht was among the Holy Land pilgrims who claimed to be eyewitnesses at a sighting of a unicorn. Engaged by the canon of Mainz Cathedral, Bernhard von Breidenbach, to provide visual documentation of the journey, Roerich created a woodcut depicting the unicorn on a page that illustrates creatures representative of the region, along with others that Europeans surely found equally exotic. A camel, a salamander, a pair of goats from India, a crocodile, a giraffe, and a curious hirsute biped leading the camel that Roerich labels as unidentifiable. The caption proclaims that they are all truthfully drawn. Konrad Gessner was not himself a traveler, but rather the chief physician, professor of physics and botanist at the Carolinum in Zurich. With enviable Protestant zeal, he rigorously reviewed key biblical, classical, and medieval tracts about the unicorn for the first of his encyclopedic multi-volume history of animals published in 1551. Gessner considered the long tapered horns preserved in European collections in Venice, Krakow, Paris, and Strasbourg as evidence of the animal's existence. Like Roerich, our artist on pilgrimage to the Holy Land, Gessner championed accuracy. And where possible, first-hand knowledge of the subjects covered in his book. He proudly informed his readers that his illustrations were from reliable sources. Witness his own notes on the tulip, the first published in Europe, and the associated image he received from a correspondent in Augsburg. Gessner did not usually provide illustrations of fantastic creatures, even though he nonetheless discussed them in his all-encompassing text. Concerning the unicorn, he requested that a trusted friend in Strasbourg, Nicholas Gerbel, a humanist in the circle of Erasmus, travel himself there, examine the one in the cathedral, and then ultimately Gessner himself traveled there to see and confirm the dimensions. Gessner subsequently added specifics about the horn at the Abbey of Saint-Denis, again obtained from a trusted correspondent, to a later edition of his book. And furthermore, he illustrates the unicorn. Gessner notes in his caption, "This figure is illustrated the way it is generally painted today. But," he adds, "I have no certainty about it. His authority is art." Indeed, Gessner's image of the unicorn appears somewhat similar to the one by Roerich, which I'm showing you again on the right, with a long horn and a raised front leg. But it has a slightly more windblown mane, shaggy rear legs, and, dare I say, untamed masculine bearing. The image seems to be a new one, inspired by the widely circulated description written by yet another traveler, Ludovico de Vartema from Bologna, who, disguised as a Mamluk, traveled to Mecca and reported having seen 2 unicorns in an enclosure there behind the Great Mosque. Jörg Breu created the woodcut of those unicorns, distinguished from Gessner's by their gently curving horns. The illustration accompanied Ludovico de Vartema's text, which was published in Italian in 1510, then within a decade in Latin and German, and Spanish, then a generation later in Danish, French, and English. The image presents two unicorns, one adult, one youthful, as curious onlookers view them through the bars of the proud anthem's cage. How remarkable that renowned, distant pilgrimage destinations, the Holy Land and Mecca, provided opportunities for unicorn sightings deemed authentic. Gessner unequivocally distinguished the unicorn from the rhinoceros, one hulking example of which arrived in Lisbon in 1515, bringing new urgency to the question of the unicorn. For now, there was an image of this great brutish creature made famous by Albrecht Dürer. But Dürer never saw the Lisbon rhino, a fact betrayed by the diminutive, supernumerary, twisting, unicorn-like horn emerging from the middle of its back. Art, in this case, is not to be trusted. Jewish physicians and rabbis wrote of unicorns too. In northern Italy, the Jewish doctor Abraham Jagel explored the subject in depth, identifying 5 types of single-horned quadrupeds. The rhinoceros, with specific reference to the one that had been sent to Lisbon, a wild horse, the wild ass of India, the African wild sheep with a cleft hoof and black horn, and the wild ox of India with a horn in the middle of its head. In 1663, the discovery of skeletal remains in the vicinity of Quedlinburg seemed to provide hard evidence of the existence of unicorns closer to home, in the woods of Germany, just as Caesar had said. Aesthetically, alas, the Quedlinburg remains seem rather inelegant by comparison with other artistic images of unicorns. But this discovery was not published with its accompanying illustrations until 1716. The discovery came at a crucial moment in learned discourse concerning the unicorn. The author of the initial illustrated report was Johannes Meyer, an astronomer and treasurer of the Abbess of Quedlinburg. Meyer's German language text was then adapted by Gottfried Leibniz for his Protegaea, an ambitious illustrated natural history, which was first printed posthumously in 1749. Leibniz indicated that Meyer had sent him both a report and a drawing of the unicorn's skeletal remains. Once again, an artistic rendering is key. Furthermore, Leibniz and his engraver, Nicholas Zeelander, then corrected and completed the reconstruction in keeping with their own notions of the unicorn. The Quedlinburg discovery was subsequently reported for a French audience by Paul-Henri Dietrich. Born in the Rhineland, he was a naturalized Frenchman resident in Paris. He described the Quedlinburg find as follows: the skeleton of a terrestrial quadruped, shortened at the back, but with its head raised, and with a horn on its forehead that was 10 feet long, as thick as a man's leg, but ending in a point. He vents his frustration at the poorly handled excavation. The skeleton was broken due to the ignorance of the workers and pulled out of the ground in pieces. Only the horn and the head survive intact, along with a few ribs and the spine. Pierre Pomé was but a small boy when the Quedlinburg skeleton was found, but he would grow up to become pharmacist to the French king, Louis XIV, and purveyor of medicinal remedies from distant lands. In his General History of Drugs, published in French in 1694, in English in 1712, and German in 1717, there's a delicious range to his writing as he opines on a wide range of subjects. He proclaims, for example, that the best dates come from Tunis, the best chocolates from his native Paris, and he notes that the popularity of tea in France has diminished since the introduction of chocolate and coffee. Pomes was a widely read voice on those subjects and the subject of unicorns. He published 5 engraved images corresponding to the discussion of unicorns. These he then localized and described in the text. All this he provided, notwithstanding the fact that he said he cannot personally vouch for what he calls the real truth of this matter. This image is from a copy of his text, which survives which is in the collection of the National Institutes of Health in Washington as part of the National Library of Medicine that was formed in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War and continues to be an important library today with both historical and up-to-date texts. Pome's engraving depicts beautiful creatures, like fine horses, alert, on the move. The one at upper left is admittedly a bit awkward, with his webbed rear feet. A type Pomme indicates is based on a publication by a fellow Frenchman, a surgeon, Antoine Paré of 1575. Another has 2 horns. In his text, and with these engravings, Pomme endeavors to compile all the available information in as clear and dispassionate a way as possible. Why did it all matter so much? Well, for many authors, there was the fact that the unicorn is mentioned a number of times in both Hebrew and Christian scripture. In terms of science and economics, the critical issue is that Ctesias's foundational text had detailed vitally important healing properties of the unicorn's horn. On the heels of the pandemic, we can surely relate to the desire to identify a cure for grave illness. Ctesias said, "They say that the one who drinks from this horn will never experience terminal illness. No longer would he suffer seizures or the so-called holy sickness, that's leprosy, nor could he be killed with poison. If he drank the poison first, he would vomit it up and return to health." The remarkable health benefits that unicorns provided were repeatedly proclaimed. The 12th century nun and mystic Hildegard of Bingen was one of them. She provided a recipe for mixing unicorn liver with egg yolk to heal leprosy. In addition, she claimed, "If you make a belt from the hide of the unicorn and gird yourself with it, no plague, however severe, and no fever will harm you." Moreover, she asserted that shoes made of unicorn leather promote healthy feet. Well, that remedy seems to have been uniquely advanced by Hildegard. Abraham Jagel, unlikely as a 16th century Italian Jew to have been reading Hildegard, similarly advanced the notion that parts of the unicorn, in addition to the horn, could likewise have health benefits. The blood, teeth, skin, and hooves were, for him, all therapeutic. Now, some medieval claims were more modest than those advanced by Hildegard. Albert the Great, the 13th century Dominican philosopher and founder of the University of Cologne, considered unicorn horn no more useful than stag horn. But he nonetheless remarked its appropriateness for whitening teeth. As chief physician of the city of Zurich, Konrad Gessner believed, like Ctesias and the host of subsequent experts, that the horn could be used to combat epilepsy. It's not clear whether Gessner thought unicorn horn effective against plague, to which he alas succumbed the year before his 50th birthday. But at the same period, in Ottoman Safed, present-day northern Israel, a court was convened to render judgment in a case concerning a unicorn goblet that had been used to treat plague. In this case, a man had lent his unicorn goblet to an acquaintance whose wife used it to treat their daughter. Despite treatment, the girl died 3 months later. The wife then lent the goblet to a neighbor similarly stricken. The goblet then disappeared. The notion that unicorn horn was an antidote to poison was the most persistent and widespread, especially amidst the political intrigue of princely courts. Still, it was almost inevitable that unicorn horn should ultimately be considered a cure-all and attain a presence in every pharmacy. In parts of Central Europe, still today, the symbol of a pharmacy, the kind of the sign that you see outside, is a big image of a unicorn's head. These are samples of unicorn horn that are in the Pharmacy Museum at Basel today. In a London advertisement of the 1600s, the following menu of cures appears. A most excellent drink made with a true unicorn's horn, which doth effectually cure these diseases, viz. Scurvy, old ulcers, dropsy, running gout, consumptions, distillations, coughs, palpitation of the heart, fainting fits and convulsions, king's evil, rickets in children, melancholy or sadness, the green sickness, obstructions, and all distempers proceeding from a cold cause. The use of it is so profitable that it prevents diseases and infection by fortifying the noble parts and powerfully expels what is an enemy to nature, preserving the vigor, youth, and a good complexion to old age. The virtue is of such force as to resist an injury from an unsound bedfellow. None can excel this, for it is joined with the virtue of a true unicorn's horn, through which the drink passeth, and being impregnated with, it doth wonderfully corroborate and cure. The advert then specifies the dosage, noting that one should drink it warm at any time of the day, about 1/4 of a pint at a time, the oftener the better, and finally noting that the price is 2 shillings the quart. Now that might sound quite reasonable, but it represented 2 days' wages for a skilled tradesman in 1620. Among the special powers repeatedly attributed to the unicorn, perhaps the most resonant today is its purported ability to purify water. The unicorn's ability to cleanse water that had been poisoned by a snake so that other animals might drink is found in some copies of the Physiologus. And a similar story appears in the Arabic language bestiary written by Ibn Battishu in the 9th century. In that account, a 2-horned beast, the dabba, miraculously purifies the water on behalf of both carnivores and herbivores, and the water remains clean for 30 days. This legend was embraced with enthusiasm by European artists. And I'm showing you a design for a tapestry that was made, that would have been made for François Robertet. He was a bourgeois collector in the mid-16th century. And you see those pernicious snakes, one coming out of the fountain and one coming out of the stream at the bottom edge, while the animals wait there poised at the edge for the unicorn's purifying powers to take effect. Most lyrically, one of the hangings in the Cloisters unicorn tapestry series shows the unicorn posed with an unlikely company of readily identifiable animals that have gathered, their red mouths gaping open, suggesting that they thirst. How surprising that these wild creatures should sit together peacefully and patiently, notwithstanding their natural antipathy to one another and the presence of hunters stunned to silence at the sight. Such was the magic of the unicorn. In the 1554 edition of his book, Gessner joined the chorus of voices concerning the unicorn's ability to purify water with its horn. In our own era, as much of the world's population struggles to find clean drinking water, while others obsess over hydration levels. Is 8 glasses a day enough? What is the optimal intake after a workout? What is the pH level of the water I'm drinking? The notion that a unicorn could ensure pure drinking water seems particularly poignant. The hunt for the unicorn, then, is the hunt for its precious and powerful horn. In the Cloisters tapestry of the hunters returning to the castle, one of the triumphant hunting party already clasps the slender horn of the dead beast in his hand, as the lord and lady with their retinue emerge from the castle to see the slain unicorn. But first, one had to find this elusive creature. The natural habitat of the unicorn was a vexing question addressed repeatedly in the travel accounts and natural histories we've considered. The unicorn's shadowy presence is effectively evoked by its subtly rendered profile on a beaker of unicorn horn in this piece from a private collection. Philostorgius averred that unicorns were usually impossible to see and not to be found in the Mediterranean, and so relied on what he deemed to be an authoritative image of one that could be found in the museum set within the imperial palace at Constantinople. If they were not to be found in the Mediterranean region, where might they be? Repeatedly, authorities understood the habitat of the unicorn to be just beyond the realm of their own experience. Arabic and Persian authors noted that creatures possessed of a single horn are said to be common in Nubia and Abyssinia, so modern-day Ethiopia and Eritrea. Alexander the Great was said to have hunted and killed the one-horned creature in Habash, again, modern-day Ethiopia. A Portuguese Jesuit missionary, Jerónimo Lobo, confirmed the presence of unicorns in Ethiopia, where he himself resided in 1624 to 34. There is a persistent notion that unicorns live far away, in a place dimly known about but seldom visited. For their part, the pilgrims traveling with artist Erhard Roerich to the Holy Land in the late 15th century swore they had seen a unicorn near Mount Sinai. There we watched a big animal that was much bigger than a camel, and our guide told us this would verily be a unicorn. That text was published in 1486 in Latin and 4 months thereafter in German, then in Dutch, Spanish, French, and Czech. 13 editions were made before 1522, printed beyond Mainz, where the first editions were printed, as far as Saragossa. Who could doubt the unicorn portrayed in such an authoritative volume? Remember, too, that for his part, Konrad Gessner, the official physician of the city of Zurich and distinguished lecturer at the Carolinum of Zurich University, relied on the authority of a Bolognese traveler who saw 2 unicorns in Mecca for the image that he published in his History of Animals, printed in 1551. And lest there be any question about the authoritative reach of Konrad Gessner's books, consider this. Mary, Queen of Scots, and Bess of Hardwick used the illustrations by Gessner and other well-known naturalists to design their needlework renderings of animals, including the unicorn, while the Scots Queen was imprisoned in England. These embroideries from 1569 to 85, known as the Oxborough Hangings, survive in the V&A London and at Oxborough Hall in Norfolk. Pierre Pomé looked to the Levant, asserting that the unicorn with webbed rear feet, known as a camphor, lives in the Arabian desert. But already in the mid-16th century, at the time of Konrad Gessner, engravings of the 4 continents by Julius Goltzius after Martin de Vos leave no doubt. Unicorns are typically American, as emblematic of the New World as the horse was of Europe, the lion of Africa, and the camel of Asia. A handsome pair of unicorns draws the chariot of the personification of America, a bare-breasted woman sporting an exotic headdress and lounging casually with a bow, a quiver of arrows, and a hatchet. In the landscape beyond, a man draws sap from a maple tree, while other natives fight with bow and arrow and engage in grisly human sacrifice. Invariably, the unicorn was perceived as just out of reach, inhabiting remote, unfamiliar territory. It was to be found across the Alps in the deep wood of Germany for Romans in the time of Caesar, a notion seemingly confirmed by the find at Quedlinburg. It was to be found, according to Persian writers, in Ethiopia, documented and said to be recorded from life in the Holy Land for medieval European pilgrims, and in the new land across the ocean for continental Europeans in the age of discovery. As the world Europeans knew grew wider and more familiar, the tide gradually turned against the unicorn. For a time, he seemed to exist alongside a maritime counterpart. Now, the goblet of unicorn mentioned earlier that was used unsuccessfully to treat a young Jewish girl suffering from plague in the mid-16th century offers a case in point. The goblet was curiously misplaced after being passed around the sick of the neighborhood. The owner then sought financial compensation for the lost goblet through the court. The borrower proclaimed it a fake, an understandable response, given the death of his daughter. Had it been thrown out in frustration? What had it looked like? A medical doctor was summoned as an expert outside witness to address the question of the goblet's authenticity and hence its replacement value. The doctor found it highly suspect that the owner had lent the supposedly valuable goblet against a mere pledge of fragrant plants, and ultimately proclaimed it to have been one of the many fakes fashioned from the bone of a fish from the sea. And the sea contained a confusing mass of fish, as the carvings of this ivory and narwhal cup in the Wadsworth Athenaeum, Hartford, and others like it attest. Just about a century later, in 1638, Ole Worm, personal physician to King Christian IV of Denmark, and acting at the request of merchants in Copenhagen, prepared a dissertation about unicorn horn. He compared the curious spiling tooth still attached to a skull and affixed to the wall near the window of his own private museum. You see it there marked out in red. Compared them to examples said to be of unicorn horn preserved elsewhere. And he determined that they were all from the narwhal, a remarkable marine mammal that inhabits Arctic waters. His scholarly undertaking was something of a family affair. Worms drew on the research of his brother-in-law, Caspar Bartholin, and his findings, Worm's findings, that is, were subsequently echoed and embellished by Thomas Bartholin, Ole Worm's nephew and professor of medicine at Copenhagen. Bartholin's subsequent book, New Observations on the Unicorn, appeared in 1645, then revised by his son, also called Caspar, in 1678. All the while, Worm and Bartholin after him attested to the efficacy of such unicorn horns as an antidote to poison. He cited the case of an experiment conducted at Augsburg with a dog, which apparently turned out well for the dog, and one carried out by pharmacist John Voldenberg of Copenhagen in 1636 with kittens and pigeons, in which, it must be said, one pigeon fared better than either of the poor kittens. After Ole Worm's analysis, the question of the unicorn's relationship to the sea is increasingly raised in the scientific literature. Indeed, there was considerable frisson among naturalists in the decades after Worm's initial study. Dr. Nicholas Tulp, the Amsterdam physician, probably known to you from as from his famous portrayal in Rembrandt's anatomy lesson, reported on a narwhal found in 1648 in his chapter dedicated to sea unicorns in his 1672 book, Medical Observations. The skeletal head and tooth/tusk of the narwhal is carefully depicted from two sides and its measurement recorded. And then, to suggest the living, breathing example, the engraver provided an image of the whole with two spouts of water coming out of its head. In fact, narwhals only have a single blowhole. The print medium facilitated the distribution of images, their authority bolstered by multiple authors in their respective publications. But the artistic renderings enlivened with waterspouts did not conform to findings in nature. As in the case of the archaeological reconstruction of the Quedlinburg unicorn, these images of the rather unfamiliar narwhal conform to what the naturalists inferred from incomplete information. In this case, they based their assumptions about blowholes on whales rather than observation of its whale's cousin, the narwhal. For the 1676 publication of Christopher Vielheuer, an apothecary from Landshut, Germany, and a contemporary of Pomme, a key illustration divides the page, juxtaposing a unicorn seated tranquilly on a grassy knoll above and labeled as a true unicorn, a horn attached to a skull in the middle of a page, hovering over the image of a narwhal, sans waterspouts, that swims through gentle waves below and labeled as a sea unicorn. This is the representation of a narwhal rendered more lively, not by waterspouts, but by waves lapping around him. In 1694, our friend Pierre Pomme, the pharmacist to Louis XIV, who published the images of 5 types of unicorns in the quadruped volume, illustrated 2 distinct sea unicorns in his volume on fish. One that swam in tropical waters, a sea unicorn, the one at the top. The other in the Arctic, which he labeled narwhal, below. The latter is similar to the one in the Dr. Taupe engraving, reversed. Pomme has further enhanced his narwhal by the addition of yet another blowhole for a grand total of 3. Again, the artist's exuberant image does not correspond to findings in nature. It bears witness to what the scientist expected or wanted to show. Pomme hastened to mention that what is sold as unicorn horn is in fact from a fish, and he casts doubt on its medical efficacy, reflecting a perception that effective cures come from true unicorn horn, ineffectual cures are attributed to narwhal. In the complicating and confusing aftermath of the Quedlinburg find, unicorn enthusiasts pondered the arguments in favor of the unicorn versus the Arctic narwhal possessed of a spiraling tooth. And indeed, an engraving published by physician and collector Michael Bernhard Valentini in his Museum Museorum, 1704, juxtaposes the Quedlinburg skeleton, the triple-spouted narwhal of Pierre Pomme, and a beautiful prancing unicorn marked as fictitious, apparently corresponding to the most handsome of the 5 depicted by Pomme. All of this, the scientific pronouncements, the competing reports and images, provided wonderful fodder for artists as they mirrored and embellished upon the evolving sciences with astounding creativity and invention. On the Hartford Cup, which was you saw a detail before, it's the large one in the middle, it's the one in the middle. The unicorn swims in crowded seas, barely keeping his head above water. Near him swims a creature with a sharp horn. In a similar object from a princely collection, the unicorn keeps company with Neptune. That's the image at the left. And while in the Dresden green vaults, the hindquarters of the unicorn are formed by a shell and his upper body of gilded silver. Now surely, well before Ole Worm's time, the Danes, deeply involved in maritime trade and in control of both Iceland and Greenland since the 1380 union of the Norwegian and Danish crowns under King Olaf II, had long known exactly whence the horns of the unicorn came. But how long had Northern Europeans sustained, even fostered, belief in the unicorn? Just how widespread was their knowledge? There are but a few tantalizing hints. Runic inscriptions appear on a horn in the Rijksmuseum dated to the 11th century that comes from St. Mary's in Utrecht. And in the 12th century, David I, King of Scotland, had sent what were described as two extremely valuable, very large teeth of a marine mammal to Abbot Suger of Saint-Denis, accompanied by a friendly letter. Were they walrus tusks or a pair of narwhal teeth? Unidentified today, the pair from Saint-Denis may find surprising counterparts in those horns preserved in the V&A and Liverpool, seen at the start of this lecture. The true source of the unicorn horn is finally brilliantly revealed on these vessels in Rosenborg Castle from the 1650s and 60s. On the covered beaker at left, an Inuit stands proudly atop the lid, holding the tooth of a narwhal in one hand. It's taller than he is. On the lidded tankard crafted by Jacob Jensen Nordmand in 1656, the right-hand side, an Inuit man perches atop the silver hinge, the twisting tooth of the narwhal clutched in his hand. And yet, the same tankard stands on silver feet in the form of unicorns. Here, myth and reality meet on a single work of art. Even in the late 1600s, another Dutch physician and author, a certain Ulfert Dapper, once again described the unicorn in well-worn, familiar terms. On the Canadian border, there are sometimes seen animals resembling horses, but with cloven hooves, rough manes, long straight horn along the forehead, a curled tail like that of the wild boar, echoing that comical aspect we heard first from Pliny, black eyes, and a neck like that of a stag. They live in the loneliest wildernesses. The natural habitat of narwhals could not be much more remote. The cold scientific facts of their life in the icy waters of the Arctic, still imperfectly understood, seem quite incredible. They travel caravan-like, in lines 3 deep. They can swim submerged nearly a mile beneath the ice for 45 minutes at a time, and they sometimes swim upside down. They deploy their spiral teeth in dramatic fashion in churning waters, but for purposes that are still debated. Everything about the narwhal is far more difficult to imagine than a horse-like creature bearing a single great horn in place of an antler, inhabiting the woods of Germany, the Holy Land, Mecca, India, Ethiopia, or even North America. From the Holy Land to the heavens. In the end, unicorns are emblematic of medieval notions of the magic of the universe and the belief in a power that can be deployed for good if only it can be harnessed. At the beginning of his book, apothecary Christoph Vielheuer cites a number of folksy rhymes and aphorisms, and in the midst of them, Psalm 66, verse 5. Come and see what God has done, his awesome deeds for mankind. Followed by Psalm 104, verse 24. How many are your works, Lord? In wisdom you made them all. The earth is full of your creatures. While our understanding of the animal from which the beautiful spiral horn derives may have changed, our sense of the boundless mysteries of the world around us, of all things wise and wonderful, should not have diminished. Thank you very much. and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Barbara. That was so enchanting and widespread. There was one question that just came up about the name of the carver who created the Inuit sculpture of narwhals and where it was exhibited.
His name was Jacob Jensen, Jensen, Nordmand, Nordmand. And you can see these if you go to Copenhagen in Rosenborg Castle on the lower level where the treasury is kept. If you haven't been to Copenhagen before, you cannot miss this castle because the throne on which the kings of Denmark are crowned is entirely made of unicorn horn. It's quite remarkable. And I think that, it seems as if a lot of people visit the castle hurriedly. Maybe they're stopping on some kind of boat tour. And it doesn't seem to be well known because people walk right by this thing and they're not even remarking what it's made of. So yeah.
Well, and it was fascinating for me. I mean, it seems so obvious in the way you've presented it, but to think about the narwhal as the sea unicorn and how obvious that is in your presentation, you just did such a wonderful poetic job of building that story and narrative and through lines for us. So thank you. Oh, I think the other thing, in case people are just taking a few moments to either think of questions because you did such a wonderful job, but an observation that I know people realize, but what is so interesting to me as far as your scholarship is has sent you on this international hunt across time around the world to look at literature, scripts, animal species. But what was your personal entry point for your first, reason to think about this area of interest for you?
Well, the story is probably longer than you want to hear, but I tried very hard to avoid unicorns for a very long time during my career because it felt like too much of a girl's topic. And I didn't want to fall into, oh, you just work on that. That's such a girly thing to do. But then, and I worked for many years in the main building before going to the Cloisters, the main building of the Met, we sometimes call them mothership. Before going to the Cloisters. And then once I got to the Cloisters, they kind of sucked me in. And I also felt that there were a lot of facile comments made about unicorns, and I reacted academically to that. I thought it was important to remember to emphasize just how multivalent the subject is. It's not just about maidens and a maiden capturing a unicorn, and it's not just about some kind of underlying religious meaning. Those things are both true, but it comes up in the context of marriage, but it comes up terrifically. And this is the thing that I found so fascinating, that this serious science, this was serious stuff. And it's hysterical, right? If you think about, all right, mix the unicorn liver with an egg yolk. It's very funny, but we can all laugh at ourselves from time to time in some of the ways that science takes funny turns on its way to finding out.
Well, and when you got to that point in your talk, I was thinking, oh, there are things in contemporary society where we all find ourselves committing to some type of fad to make sure we don't get sick. Or
it's so true. It's so true. We haven't really come that far since the Middle Ages. No, I absolutely right.
We like to think we advanced. Well, you know, there's one other comment here that is just commending you on such an exceptional talk, supported by superb scholarship. So I think we can all agree to that. So again, thank you for joining us and lending your expertise and your passion on unicorns in conjunction with Emilie's show, and for all of you joining us at home for lending some of your summer afternoon. It is certainly nice here in Maine, and I hope it is where you all are joining in from as well. So enjoy the rest of your afternoon, everyone. And Barbara Drake Boehm, you're amazing. And to all the unicorns out there, we're very grateful for
So
everything you do.
So happy to be part of this. Thank you.
Take care, everyone. Bye.